items numbers 26 through 28. We'll now open public comment. I do have 2 speaker request forms. First up would be Mr. Patrick Vidal. You would approach the podium, sir, state your name for the record, and give us your comments on item number 26. Either one.
Here to request the City Council's help in solving a drainage problem that a property I own at 2130 Jackson Boulevard now has. This problem was created by the site grading that was done by the Rapid City Regional Hospital for its urgent care west property at 2116 Jackson Boulevard. This property lies immediately to the east and downstream from my property. The problem I have is the hospital site grading has significantly altered and obstructed a drainage way that is supposed to exist along the front of our properties, according to the South Dakota DOT street drainage plan for Jackson Boulevard. This drainage way was designed to allow runoff plus street overflows that might come onto our properties during storms to be able to drain off them as quickly as possible. Now, with the hospital's current site grading, the runoff and street overflows that come onto my property will sometimes be partially blocked from being able to drain off my property. This will cause these flows to back up on my lots and accumulate on them in unusual and unnatural quantities. I believe that what the hospital has done to me is a violation of South Dakota urban drainage law. This is because it has unreasonably interfered with the only natural drainage path my property has available for its surface waters. More importantly, it could have made reasonable use of its property without interfering with the DOT drainage way. The city has an interest in this matter because its engineering department had advanced knowledge of DOT's drainage way before the hospital obstructed it, yet it's still allowed and is continuing to allow the hospital to obstruct it. The hospital finally has made some minor revisions to its site grading to provide my property some drainage. However, these revisions still not provide me even close to the drainage I am supposed to have according to DOT's drainage way plan. This is why I'm requesting that the City Council require the hospital to make some further revisions to its site grading. The city's engineering department has refused to require them to make any further revisions. Now, if you want to look at some pictures, I can kind of show you what's happened.
You're welcome to show anything you have within the remaining time that you have, Mr. Vidal, and otherwise you will be here for questions, and the committee may address questions to you during that time if you're
And how much time do I have remaining?
I don't know. I'm watching the lights here. I wasn't sure when. How much? It doesn't show us. It's kind of primitive up here. I'm not sure how much time you have remaining, sir.
Where do we show them? You want to ask questions? Yeah. Okay. You guys have
Sure, yes.
most of the pictures. I do have some photos of what actually exists now if you want to see those, but if you went out and looked at it, you know.
Okay, and it looks like the equipment's not quite set up. So we're going to go ahead and move on, and when we get to your item, maybe one of us can get you back up here to show those pictures if you're okay with that.
That's fine.
Thank you. We'll move on to a speaker request form from Hanny Shafi for item number 28, please.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair and members of the Commission. This application for removal of the median on Eglin Street and Elkville Road for convenience store on Eglin Street has been submitted to the city for a while, and we would like to have you folks, or request you folks to take action on it. And it meets all the criteria that the drainage design criteria, the city design criteria manual requires. and it's consistent with AASHTO requirements. And I got some slides that I could show you. Oh, okay. Oh, I got some. Can I put it on the camera? Sure. Sorry. Wow. I don't know if you can see this, but it's, Eglin is on the, Elkvale is on the, my right hand side, and then east-north on the left. And you could see where Eglin is. And the approach is right about 308 feet away from the intersection of Eglin and Elkvale. And right now there is a median. That median was required during the design of the street, and the owner put in a little bit of a fight thinking that it might work, but unfortunately his business has been suffering for years. When the lot was platted, there was no access easement put in the plat except for that approach. So because the non-access easement was consistent with the approach location, or the approach location was consistent with the non-access easement requirements that are put forth by the design criteria manual. If you look at the traffic counts on that street, I cannot see the numbers from here, but if you for Eglin Street between east-north and the east-north to Dias is about 6,000, is going up based on the traffic counts since 2012. On this location, the traffic counts have been steady about 4,200. The state, I realize that the staff have put in a letter from the state which did not really show any criteria violations. As a matter of fact, the state just opened their driveway within the portion between east-north and Dias within the same criteria. So I'll be available for any questions you may have. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Shafi. I'll now close public comment on items numbers 26 through 28, since we do not have any additional speaker request forms. Moving on to item number 26, which is a request by Pajo Properties, LLC, that the city require Rapid City Regional Hospital to regrade its lots 14 through 17, Block 1, Rapid River subdivision to comply with the state of South Dakota's planned Jackson Boulevard drainage system. We'll go to Alderman Wright, please.
I'd like to request that Pat bring those pictures forward and put them up on the screen so we can see them.
I have no idea.
You got pictures?
Just a minute. What you see here is DOT's street plans for Jackson Boulevard in front of my lots and the hospital's lots. My lots are lot 12 and 13, and the hospital's lots are 14, 15, 16, and 17. You can see in front of our lots on the back side of the sidewalk between lot F and lot 6 and lot 15, the DOT planned on installing curb and gutter and 3 inlets along that section of the sidewalk, of the back of the sidewalk. This was the drainage way it planned to exist to help carry the flows that were going to be on our lots, or the street flows that would come onto them. The inlet in front of Lot 11 would be a curb inlet. The inlet on Lot 13 would be an area inlet because it's in front of a parking lot access ramp that goes down into my lot. The inlet in front of the hospital's Lot 15 was supposed to be a curb inlet, but it had to be changed because the hospital filled in the area between its parking lot and the sidewalk to such an extent that the DOT couldn't put in their curb and gutter or their curb inlet. So they just raised that inlet's elevation to the top of the sidewalk, which is where the hospital site grading went to, and changed that inlet to an area inlet. But anyway, that's the drainage way that I'm talking about. Okay, how do I change it to profile? Just put it up there? Okay. This exhibit compares the drainage ways that DOT had in mind and the drainage ways that were left after the hospital did what it planned to do and what it actually did to the area that's in the southwest corner of its property. This top cross-section shows the area that the drainage way would have had DOT had the hospital left that area of its parking lot alone as DOT planned it to be. This area would have provided enough area for the equivalent of a 100-year storm to be able to drain off my lot. And what would happen is the water would drain off my lot onto the hospital's lot 14, and then onto its lot 15, and then it would drain back into the street where the elevations were such that it could drain back into the street. The next drainage way is what the hospital submitted as part of its building permit plans. And you can see that it doesn't provide nearly the amount of drainage that the DOTs would have provided, and this is what caused me to first object to what they were doing. The next drainage way is what they actually did. They didn't grade it at all like they showed on their building permit plans. Basically, the area wasn't going to allow my property to drain onto their property at all. After they did that grading, I complained to the engineering department, and the city engineer wrote them a letter saying that they needed to change their site grading to provide adequate drainage, and those were his exact words, to assure adequate drainage. So this drawing is what they came up with to provide me some drainage. It certainly wasn't going to provide me adequate drainage if I had a 100-year storm crossing my property, or a 50-year storm, or a 25-year storm, or even a 10-year storm, but it would provide a little bit of drainage. The next drawing is what they actually did. They didn't grade it the way they told the city engineering department they were going to grade it. This is what's out there right now. And then this final drainage way is what I'm proposing as a compromise to resolve this issue. It provides me quite a bit of drainage, but still not as much drainage as I could have had a DOT's drainage way been allowed to exist. This will not require the hospital to change its parking lot. I realize that would be very expensive for him, and I would only really need that to happen for the 50-year, the 100-year storm, considering the possibilities that those aren't going to occur. Well, they're going to occur, but they have a very low chance of occurring. I would be willing to do this, provided the hospital would allow me to do some things in its landscaped area between our properties. This shows the drainage way that exists there now. You can see it's very shallow. There's not much to it at all. Now you can imagine if a 100-year storm hits, I am going to have more than a rapid creek flowing across the front of my parking lot. This is what's going to be available for it to flow off my parking lot. Hardly anything at all. This is the drainage way from my parking lot's view. Again, you can see it's hardly anything. This is the drainage way from the hospital's entrance view. This shows the grate that had to be raised to match their site grading. That's supposed to be a grate it's supposed to be 6 inches lower than that, and it's supposed to tie into a curb and gutter system that, as I explained, is not there. Here's a picture of the grate that's on lot 11. This same type of grate is supposed to be what's on the hospital's lot 15. This is the drainage way that I am hoping can be put in there that you would require the city to provide. It's like I say, this would be a compromise. It would turn the hospital's southwest corner pretty much into an entire channel. I'm proposing that it be grass. It would be better if it was concrete or asphalt, because that would provide more a smoother slope for the water to drain over. I'm asking that the inlet at lot 15 be returned to be the way DOT designed it to be, and that curb and gutter be installed along the sidewalk as DOT designed the drainage way to be. As part of my compromise for not requiring the hospital to change its parking lot as it should to provide me the same drainage that DOT planned for me, I would like to be able to, there's an old chain link fence that the hospital owns right on our border. This is a picture of it. I mean, it is in a total state of disrepair. It's ugly, but they really don't care because they don't look at it as that much, and it looks like it's my fence, but it's not. But it's embarrassing. And there's poles that have been cut off, and the remnants from those poles are sticking out of the ground. I trip over them all the time. They're a danger. I would just like to see this fence disappear. This fence also prevents me from putting in any curbing or anything or any landscaping along my border that I would like to put in just to make that area a little bit more attractive. So basically what I'm saying here is that I would be willing to not require the hospital to change its parking lot, but in return for that, I would hope it would work with me in allowing me to make this area between our parking lots a little more attractive. That's it. I'm open for questions. I mean, there's a lot more to this. There's a lot of history to this. I've provided that to you. It would have taken me an hour or so to go through all of that. So I'm hoping you read what I sent to you and understand it. But feel free to ask me all the questions you want.
Thank you, Mr. Vidal. Mr. Wright, you still have the floor.
Thank you. It appears that we have a conflict between two private property owners, and I'm not sure what jurisdiction we as a city have, if any, this particular issue, and I'd like to ask the attorney's opinion on direction for the council on this item.
It's my understanding that the Public Works Department has looked at this. The hospital submitted a drainage plan. I'm assuming an engineer signed off on their drainage plan, both the engineer for the hospital that developed the lot as well as the city reviewing what the engineer submitted. I don't know that there's anything that we can do to require them to go back and now change it to match the original plan. I mean, obviously, there's a reason why we have an original plan and we have as-built, because very rarely does a street project or other project get built exactly like it was originally designed. It looks like and sounds like the hospital went through the appropriate procedures to get that amended. Obviously, Mr. Vidal is not happy with those amendments and believes that, and you know, I'd note, he cited the correct standard, whether it unreasonably interferes with his use of his property. Well, as you can tell, that's a somewhat subjective opinion, because I'm sure what Mr. Vidal thinks is a reasonable effect on his property, the hospital probably would disagree with. It's my understanding he's been trying to work with the hospital, and that the hospital has decided they're no longer going to try to work with Mr. Vidal, which is, I think, part of the reason he's sitting here asking you to help him. But, you know, I just question, this is two private property owners, a development of the hospital, and changes that were made based on a state project, yet now the city is now being asked to be the one to step in and apparently litigate or try to enforce this on the hospital. And I just, you know, again, we're only hearing one side of the story, and it's not the council's, really the council is not well suited to sit and listen to evidence and make decisions, and that's really what the courts are for. So I think if Mr. Vidal believes that the hospital needs to make changes to their drainage, I think he has an avenue to do that, and it's through the courts.
Mr. Wright, you still have the floor.
I'm done. Thank you. For now.
Alderman Estes, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I had a chance to go out and look at this with Pat. You know, and I remember the old days when water just used to flow down Jackson Boulevard and a foot deep, and so I can understand the change, and I understand how that affects, and the state worked with Mr. Vidal and how that affects his property, but you know, and there's no, the problem I see, there's not a drainage easement on, I'll call Mr. Vidal Party A and the other land Party B. There's not an easement in place for Mr. Vidal Party A's benefit across that property. But where I see a problem, and where I see whether we want to be involved or not, we are. You know, from my practical experience as somebody who's done a little bit of building and has called for inspection, is generally we as a city, or the city inspectors, don't go out and check elevations, and they look at the general slopes and stuff, but most times the landscaping is inspected for points, to make sure that you've got the proper plantings in and you meet your points and everything like that. But there is a letter where Mr. Vidal must have talked to our city engineer, and the city engineer did send a letter to the hospital and said that, you know, their landscaping or their drainage that was cut into that property didn't meet their original plans. So then the hospital hired TSP, and Mr. Reed from TSP submitted a change. And then on October 16th, there was a letter by Mr. Tech that kind of implied that that he's reviewed that change and approved it, and that change kind of matches the original intent. And as somebody who sometimes can and can't read plans very good, you know, I can go out there with Mr. Vidal, and I'll tell you that in the strictest term, it still doesn't meet that second, you know, so we've kind of, in my mind, we've kind of inserted ourselves as somebody who's inspecting landscaping that in the final result acts as drainage, and you know, it doesn't, I don't think it meets it hardly any closer than it did. Now, whether we have the right to do that because the hospital, I mean, there's no drainage easement for Mr. Vidal's benefit, you know, I don't know where we start and where we stop, and that's where it kind of becomes a civil litigation issue. So I've rambled on enough, but when I look at TSP's revised plan of 8/19, where it talks about straight grading from the edge of the sidewalk down to the flow line of a drainage feature, and you go walk on site, it's not like that. And there again, but I'm not sure that we have the authority to go inspect that and make further comments on it, because A, it's landscaping, and B, it's drainage that I think the hospital and Mr. Vidal have to decide, if it's their obligation to allow to provide for his drainage to come onto their property. So with that, I'll pass.
Thank you, Mr. Estes. We'll go to Alderman Weifenbach, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and there is a lot of information here, and I read it all. And I'm not sure, from a layperson who doesn't really have a lot of experience with building, but would have an expectation as a property owner and a construction on a major road in front of his property, say if I owned this property, and the neighbor next to me was going to bulldoze a property and rebuild a new property, and there was plans available that said that we're going to remove the water from Jackson Boulevard because, as Alderman Estes alluded to, it got quite deep there at times, and we're going to redirect that water across Mr. Vidal's property and across the property that is adjacent to that property, and we're going to go as far to put inlets in and as far to draw up the plan for it, and then that's the part where I get lost. I'm not sure Mr. Vidal, from his information here, had stopped into the city to ask about the easements. He went to the drainage engineers that are here in our city and was working with them before this even took place, before this property was even built, at the hospital's property was even built. So I'm trying to get my arms around it. I'm not exactly sure what questions to ask, but I have a multitude of them. And my first question I would like to direct our Public Works, Dale Tech, our city engineer, is, were these plans available to the city and to the hospital that show that the inlets were in there and provided for this approach that, I mean, this is in the right-of-way, so it's really has a lot to do with the Department of Transportation redirecting the water flow. I mean, the drainage issues in our town have been very prevalent. They're very top of mind in awareness, and most people that build today have to do retention ponds on their own property. So how does this not take place? I mean, where does this plan come into essence, though? The one where we see the inlets are put in for the water drainage from Mr. Vidal's property into the property next to him to help eliminate some of the water that he got extra onto his property.
Mr. Tech, if you would.
I'll do my best. First of all, the state's realignment, vertical realignment of Jackson Boulevard, they raised the road. The problem with doing that is the curb and gutter capacity wasn't enough to contain all the water running down Jackson Boulevard. So it spills over onto Mr. Vidal's property and to other properties along that stretch. That's the reason that the DOT put those inlets in there, was to try to drain that water back. During the course of the hospital, all they did was submitted a building permit application. They didn't do any replatting, anything of that nature, any plan developments or anything to change the use of their property other than they wanted to build a new building. That application came forward as a commercial building permit, which engineering reviews. We don't require on any commercial building property or building permit review an analysis of the 100-year flows for the entire basin. What they submitted for a grading plan showed positive drainage from their site into the adjoining roadway, which happened to be Jackson Boulevard, which is the state project. As I understand it, TSP, which would be the consultant for the hospital, did not pick up that inlet that the DOT had shown and may have even been installed and was buried at the time when they submitted the building permit. The staff person that reviewed the building permit didn't have that information available to them. As a matter of practice, any state project that's going on a state corridor, the city has very little involvement with it, with the exception of our utilities that go hand in hand with that project. So that staff member did not have any direct knowledge of the state's drainage system that they designed there. To go on a little further, Mr. Vidal talks about the elevation of that inlet that's on the hospital property. That inlet was installed by the state. He alluded to the fact that Regional Hospital changed their plan, therefore the state raised that inlet. It's my opinion that the state is the cause of Mr. Vidal's issues with the water running onto his property. They made attempts to alleviate that and have worked with him, have come to some settlement with him as far as I know, but if Mr. Vidal wants that inlet lowered that the state installed, he should be talking to them. They're the ones that installed it. If he wants a different result, they're the ones that should be taking action on it, in my opinion.
Can I comment on some of these things? Is there?
Madam Chair,
not at the time.
I have another. My question, in June of 2013, Mr. Vidal approached the city about acquiring drainage easements to deal with the extra water flow that was in the city. So, is that not correct? What follow-up would have been done, I guess?
As I understand, Mr. Vidal came to the engineering counter and inquired about drainage easements. If there's a parcel that has drainage running across it, does it need to have drainage easement? The answer was a generic, yes, it does. However, during any building permit review, if there are water from adjoining properties that are going across it and they are not making any changes, channelizing, re-subdividing, combining lots, there's no requirement. We have nothing in code that requires people to record those drainage easements.
He actually specifically named two engineers in the engineering department that were both drainage engineers, according to this paperwork. Mr. Vidal, do you remember what their names were?
Mary Brown,
Mary Brown and Mary Schweitzer?
Michelle Schweitzer.
Michelle Schweitzer. So they're not engineers?
There is no Mary Brown that works in engineering.
There is no Mary Brown that works in your department?
No.
Well, I was.
Alderman Weifenbach has the floor. Please hold your comments unless you asked a question.
How about
Thank you, sir.
Michelle Schweitzer?
Yes.
She's a drainage engineer?
No, she's our sanitary sewer engineer.
Pardon?
No, Michelle Lashley is her name now. She is our sanitary sewer engineer.
Okay. So when they bulldozed the building and rebuilt it, there's no requirement for them to contain their own drainage?
As part of a building permit review for a grading plan, they show, our requirement is that they are not taking their drainage somewhere where it didn't go before. And that's exactly what they showed as part of their grading plan, that the rear of the lot drained to the, I'll call it the north, and the south part of their lot drained out to Jackson Boulevard as it had in the past.
I just, what befuddles me, Madam Chair, is the fact that we knew that we elevated the street.
The state did.
The state did, but the city also knew. I mean, if the city doesn't know what's going on with a major project in our city, I said, we got other issues to resolve, but the inlets were put in. I'm not sure exactly how, you know, how the state relates to the city in that manner. The plans were available. I'm not sure. I'm not sure what direction I would go on this, but it seems to me that a simple, I don't know, once they asked for a building permit on a property that was being built, I don't know, I guess they probably wouldn't know where it came from. I guess I'll yield and listen to what everybody else
Well,
has
it
to
really
say.
depends, Mr. Weifenbach, on if someone's inquiring about a specific project or if they're just looking at the design criteria manual and asking basic generic questions. The answers could very well be different. And if you think about it from staff's perspective, not knowing it being tied to a specific project, I mean, they're answering the questions to the best of their ability.
Thank you.
Yes, sir. Mr. Roberts, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Pat, you looked like you had something to say there at the end. What did you say the two people that you spoke to, their names were Michelle Schweitzer and?
And I thought it was Mary Brown. It's Mary Bosworth. I'm sorry.
Thank you. Can I ask the Public Works Director a question, or Dale Tech, doesn't matter, whoever wants to answer.
Please do.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My question is, on this building permit, it looked like the lot was raised considerably. Does that come through on the building permit too? Because effectively, it looked like when I was out there walking this property, in a 50 or 100-year storm, we basically built a detention pond in this guy's parking lot. I mean, it looks like they raised that lot 14 inches, 12 to 14 inches.
They may have in some areas, yeah. They, I believe, elevated the building site, and with doing that, you're going to raise the parking area around it. As far as blocking the drainage, the sidewalk elevation at the inlet that Mr. Vidal showed on his pictures is still lower than the elevation of the edge of Mr. Vidal's parking lot. So they're not retaining water there. I think his argument is it won't drain as fast as it could. Is that a valid argument? It is, absolutely. However, there's still positive drainage. The water won't stand on Mr. Vidal's property. It'll drain across the hospital's property and back onto Jackson Boulevard.
It won't drain the way that it was initially engineered to drain, and I think one of the concerns that Mr. Vidal has is because we're funneling it into such a small drainage area, in a large storm, that water is going to back up into his property. And I would be concerned about that too if it was my property. And it sounded to me from what I read here, and I read this all too, it sounds like he did pretty much everything he could or knew how to do as far as working with the city. And I guess another question I have is if he brought this to Mary Bosworth and Michelle Schweitzer, why didn't it ever come across somebody else's desk? Did it just stop there?
No, we met with Mr. Vidal many, many times, and I don't know if that is spelled out real well in his report. We met with him, the DOT, the hospital. It's not like this was ignored. There were many hours of discussion that went into this. One correction I think needs to be made is the DOT, when they realized there's going to be ponding behind the project they built, they put inlets in. That's exactly what they did. I don't believe that they crunched the numbers to know what the capacity of those inlets were until Mr. Vidal came forward and said there's a problem. So the initial state design for this drainage was just to put some inlets in to drain water that's back behind the back of the curb. And then Mr. Vidal's involvement in it, they started putting actual numbers to how much water is going to go into each inlet, so on and so forth. So to say that the state had a comprehensive design to alleviate Mr. Vidal's problem. I don't believe that to be true.
Well, it also looked like before this property was raised, it would also run across the property and out onto the road on high flows, where now you got a property that's 14 inches higher, it's not going to flow across that property.
But the controlling factor is actually going to be the back of the curb and the sidewalk elevation that the state.
There is no back of a curb over there by that drain.
Right. The sidewalk takes off from the back of the curb, and it's a set elevation that the DOT constructed that at. That's the dam, if you will, that's causing the water to not be able to drain, with the exception of the inlets.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Tech. And I do think that I want to look at this a little bit further, possibly talk with you a little more, Mr. Vidal, talk with a couple more people. But it does look like there was probably a communication problem within the city. And I think that another one, can I ask you another question, Mr. Tech, real quick? Is that all right? It looks like the original agreement after Mr. Vidal brought it forward, or the second time he brought it forward, but the agreement that they had as far as the channel and what they built are not even close to what was agreed upon. So I guess my question is, did anyone go out and inspect that afterwards? So we are asking people to do something, and we're just taking it that they're going to do it. But if they don't do it, what do we have, or what does Mr. Vidal have as far as remedies for that?
Once again, I think Joel had alluded to this. It's a civil matter between the two properties. It happens quite a bit where we get, especially in residential areas, where we have a minor drainage easements between properties that are supposed to be maintained. One person comes in and landscapes it and completely ruins it.
So let me ask you one more question, if you don't mind, Madam Chair. So why do we even have building permits? Why do we even have inspections if we're not holding people accountable for them?
Was that rhetorical, or would you like an answer?
That's my question.
Public Works, if you would.
I don't have an answer to that.
Because I find this completely ridiculous that he has to take this to court after all the work that he put into it. And, you know, I can't imagine this would be more than, I don't know, a few $1,000s that Rapid City Regional would have to take care of it and do it the right way, the way that they were supposed to have done it according to the agreement the city had with them. So anyway, thank you, Madam Chair. I'm getting a little frustrated.
Thank you, Mr. Roberts. I see 3 of my committee members are in the queue once again. I haven't asked any questions. Would you gentlemen mind if I ask a few questions before I? Okay. Go right ahead. Thank you. Mr. Vidal, if you would, if someone mentioned a settlement from the Department of Transportation to you because of some of these issues, can you explain what that was for? You know, what that money was for?
They gave me money to change the slope of my parking lot so that the water that would flow across it would not come so close to my building.
And did you make those improvements?
Not yet, because I'm waiting to see what happens here.
Okay, so you do have the finances to do that pending what goes on
Yes,
here?
and
Okay.
I do intend to do that.
And then the other question I have for you, Mr. Vidal, is that I just want to make sure I heard you correctly earlier. You are offering to make these improvements to Regional Health's lot in order to get this issue alleviated.
No, you heard that incorrectly.
Please clarify.
Okay, what I offered, what the hospital needs to change to provide me the same drainage that I would have had DOT's drainage way been intact, they would have needed to change what I call their southwest corner, which is just a landscaped area. But they also would have needed to change part of their parking lot. What my offer was that instead of making them change their parking lot, which I know would be expensive, I would like to be able to work with them to improve the landscaped area that exists between their parking lot and my parking lot. I'll show you. It's the area where the fence was.
I remember the photo,
Okay.
thank you.
Yeah, it's just a small rock area, but that area just adds salt to the wounds, drains onto my property, so they're actually adding water onto my property that they are then going to block from being able to escape my property.
Okay, thank you for clarifying. I would remind my fellow committee members there is no motion on the floor. We'll go to Alderman Wright, please.
Thank you. There appears to be a question and issue here, but I do want to go over some points that I have observed, and that is that the water in question is not the water from Rapid City Regional Hospital property. It's the water that's coming across your property to their property and not draining. It's also my understanding that the water from Rapid City Regional Hospital's property is properly being drained and not contributing to the problem. Also understand that the design that DOT implemented and installed contributed to the issue. What appears to me is we have a issue between two private property owners. I don't see where we have the jurisdiction to do anything as a city council. We also have a licensed engineer involved that we haven't talked about. And he designed that capacity, and I assume that if the capacity is inadequate, then that question needs to be answered by him. And if it wasn't built according to his plans, I would say, if I were him, I'd want to know why. I do believe that this is an issue, but I believe it's between two private owners and possibly that design engineer, and I hope it can be resolved peacefully. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Wright. Go to Alderman Estes, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. You know, there's a conversation. You know, as the city looks at a building permit, I mean, the hospital project for their building permit, they showed their site plan and the drain, you know, and I know why they raised their parking lot 14. So, I mean, they designed their site so that, I mean, it would drain, and it would drain out to the lowest point, which makes sense. And as a building permit application, it stands on its own, and they have the ability to drain their own water. Now, as Mr. Vidal goes to the counter and as I understand it, asks about easements and states that code, I believe that I think that the answer that he got was because if people come out and do new plats, if you take raw land and you're platting raw land, and you look at the topography, we don't allow platting to take place unless all the proper drainage easements are in place. But for us to have ability to stop a building permit and force someone to grant their neighbor a drainage easement, I don't think I guess I'd have to ask the city attorney if I could, madam. Do we have the ability to not grant somebody like the hospital a building permit and force them to give the neighboring property a drainage easement?
Mr. Landine, if you would.
No, I don't believe in conjunction with the building permit that we have the ability to do that. I mean, obviously, to the extent we did require drainage, the hospital would be entitled to compensation for that.
You know, the only thing where I sit is that in response to Mr. Tech's letter to the hospital, they expended money and had their landscaping, a totally new landscape plan or a little site plan drawn up by Mr. Reed at TSP. Mr. Tech said, you know what, if you build this like that, it's his opinion, the city's opinion, that then you've tapered your land and put in a drainage feature that meets the intent of the original site plan that we approved. And to me, the hospital didn't perform that. I don't know if Mr. Tech's gone out and looked at it. I think he said he didn't. But in my novice eyes, it still doesn't meet that, and I wish they would. As far as compromises with that fence and you know, that's just ground that I don't think we belong. We're not in the business of making compromises between two landowners. So anyway, that's where I sit right now. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Estes. Reminder that there is no motion currently on the floor. We'll go to Alderman Weifenbach, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'd move to continue this for 30 days to the next I mean, not the next Public Works meeting, but the following one.
I
Thank
have a
you.
motion from
I'd
Wythenbach,
like to hold
second
the
from
floor.
Roberts. You do have the
I
floor.
think
Thank
that
you.
there's been some, I mean, I don't think that Mr. Vidal just got done saying that some of the Rapid City Regional's water pours onto his parking lot. Am I correct, Mr. Vidal? That some of the
Yeah,
water-
it's a small amount, but it's,
Okay.
you know,
So
it's
for
just, it shouldn't be happening.
Right,
That
for-
water is
for-
supposed to go the other direction.
Said that it doesn't is wrong, is incorrect.
That is true.
Okay. And then I also agree with Alderman Estes. Haven't had time. I was gone. I hadn't had time to go check out the site. But one of the problems we have is that the building permit was issued with a specific drainage drawing. And then there is a letter that states, and I'll read it, the proposed revisions appear to maintain the original intent of the approved construction drawings associated with the commercial building for this property. So it appears to be, so we don't know. And I guess our building permit doesn't require that. Madam Chair, I would like to ask Mr. Tech if our building permits require an on-site inspection.
Mr. Tech?
Typically, when a grading portion for a commercial property is included in a building permit, it's just as I think Mr. Estes described. You go out, we don't go out with a level and surveying equipment and verify to the nearest quarter inch if it was built properly.
But that didn't answer my question. Do or don't we inspect?
Yes, the site visit is done, the
Well, you
grading plan is
inspected it.
signed off on, that it meets generally what was submitted and approved.
So, Madam Chair, this letter, I don't understand then. So did this meet the criteria or does it not for the drainage? I guess that's the one question that that should be answered at some point. The other question is if I'm Mr. Vidal and I have a property and I come to the city and I go to the engineering department and I start to question people about a property that I know is going to be purchased by someone else and it's going to be bulldozed and it's going to be redone and I see the elevations changing and I come to the city, to the professionals here at the city, I think that would raise a flag. I mean, there's some sort of level of I mean, if you read here, I've got it right here and it states it says, and I'm not sure, I don't know who Mary Bosworth is or Michelle Schweitzer, but they reviewed the 416, an opinion from the city attorney's office. They also went to Wade Nyberg and got an opinion on this specific property. It wasn't like a generalization of any properties. It happened to be the Rapid City Regional Hospital. They assured me they would require Rapid City Regional Hospital to recognize the drainage way and provide an easement for it once RCH applied for a building permit to develop its lots. So Mr. Vidal came to the city expecting that the city knew what was going on. And he came here, did his due diligence, saying, hey, listen, there's something happening on this lot that could affect the drainage for my lot. Because you hear with the state, and he shows the people the state drawing that says the inlets are made here for my water to come across my parking lot into your parking lot. We need to address this so I can get drainage easements to make sure this happens. I began to gather information with assistance from the city's drainage engineers, whether they are or not, he believed they were, what size the easement would need to be. My discussions with the city drainage engineers regarding the drainage way and the easement it would require began in June and July of 2013. The hospital didn't close on the property till September of 2013. So there was plenty of knowledge ahead of time that Mr. Vidal had some concerns about the drainage on his property that would happen if the city issued a permit for this building to be built. That's the part I just can't get my arms around. I just don't know how, at this point, we can't make, from my understanding, we can't make the Rapid City Regional Hospital do anything. I have a hard time believing that TSP didn't have access to the state's information when Mr. Vidal actually talked to these people. They made some agreements that they would do a certain way just to try to appease something to keep the water off there. We don't know if that got done because the letter says it appears to meet that. I don't know if we actually made a physical inspection. And the other thing that kills me, this is top of mind. Top of mind. The taxpayers of Rapid City just got hit with $2 million some dollars worth of, I don't know what the number actually came out to, but they had got added onto their property taxes a drainage tax because it's a utility and it's a real major issue in our community. So I believe it's a top of a mind thing. I think Mr. Vidal made his efforts, and I guess I would ask my Public Works Department to tell me where I'm wrong and on this timelines, or maybe we need some time to look at this and see what went wrong. I mean, if I'm Mr. Vidal and I come to the city, I just have an expectation that if I raise this question, that we're going to talk about this thing and we're going to get it resolved, knowing that someone's going to build on that property, and knowing that I have drawings that the state DOT spent the time and the engineering money and everything, put the inlets in to put it in the stormwater, which makes sense. It makes a lot of sense when you consider that we have drainage problems all over the city because things like this happened in the past that didn't get taken care of. I'm not sure, I mean, I don't know how we fix that, but I believe that there's got to be more to this discussion than just dismissing it as Mr. Vidal's problem. I think the city shares in this problem to a certain level, and we need to understand that, where that sits. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Weifenbach. Would you mind clarifying your motion, what you would like to see happen in 30
Yeah,
days?
my
We
motion
have a
would be to
30-day.
continue this to answer these questions. There was a conversation with Mrs. Bosworth and Mrs. Schweitzer from Mr. Vidal. If those conversations happened, we need to understand how they
For
happened and
further
how they,
investigation.
yeah, how they didn't get to the building permit process, because now Mr. Vidal believed that he was doing the right thing to try to keep this from happening. Now we're here today, sitting here saying, this is your problem, Mr. Vidal. You need to go sue these people, and it's going to cost you thousands of dollars to cure something that I see should have been cured in the first place.
Okay, so let me reframe. Are you asking Public Works to come back with answers to these
Yeah,
questions?
I
Or
would-
are you
I
needing
would.
the 30 days to give
No, I'm-
yourself time to go ferret out the answers to these
I have no
questions?
more time to do this stuff. I believe this is a public work issue that needs to be resolved to find out how this all transpired. If Mr. Vidal's timelines are accurate, I think the city shares in some accountability here, and if nothing else, could act as a mediator to get the hospital to do something to alleviate his problem from his building that he didn't do, that he just was simply there, owned the building, and now he thought he did the right thing by coming to the city looking for answers. And in the meantime, a building permit got passed whoever he was talking to without his knowledge. So,
Thanks for the
make
clarification.
sense?
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Alderman Wright, please.
I can second that motion if you wish, and I'd like to.
Mr. Roberts has.
Okay, thank you. Well, my question, or my point I want to make is that the city did not do any of the design work. And there, as I said earlier, there appears to be some issues. There are issues. Had it been designed, I would say, in accordance to the stormwater flow that was coming across there, and had it been built in accordance to that design, we may not be having this discussion. And that's what I'm saying. But the city did not design it. Someone else did. And that person or that firm and that approach needs to be brought into this. So I agree with the 30-day wait, but I think the city's getting beat up unfairly on this. We reviewed it, but we didn't design it. And we need to turn to those people that designed it to make sure their designs are done right. Because if they're not, everybody's in trouble. That's why they're there, and that's why they're licensed. So I agree with the delay for 30 days. Get some answers. Thank you.
Okay, if I may, Mr. Tech had a question about, okay, we've already kind of clarified that this isn't something that the city is going to actually go do in any engineering on as far as verifying that it was implemented and constructed correctly. So when we deal with an issue wherein a firm is hired, the improvements are made, and they don't meet it. I mean, just like we have done in the past, when a contractor we have hired hasn't met our expectations or our plans, we have pressed it legally. We have initiated a lawsuit to either get it repaired or recover those damages. Could you please comment on really what the broader scope is here with all of this? I know there's a lot of gray area.
I guess in regards to design and who's responsible for what, there's two other parties involved in this. The Department of Transportation and Rapid City Regional Hospital. They've spent hours working with Mr. Vidal and trying to resolve this issue. They were both invited today to attend the meeting. They declined to come. So if there are questions that need to be answered, they need to be part of that discussion too. It's not just a city issue, in my opinion. So if we can get some guidance as to involving other parties, or if the Public Works Department needs to try to formulate answers on behalf of other parties, direct us to do so, and we'll do our best.
That makes sense to the committee members? Yeah, by all means. Mr. Weifenbach, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I understand, but I think from the advice of our legal counsel, they said that there's nothing we can do to, I mean, there's some confusion that I guess maybe I'm confusing, but I understand this is not a design problem. It's a fact that the building permit was issued with a different design than what was created from the Department of Transportation, okay? So it's two different issues. The Department of Transportation designed the inlets and the slopes to run from Mr. Vidal's property into the Rapid City Regional Hospital's property. He came to the city and said, hey, listen, this was in June when he found out that they had the plans to run the water, to elevate the street and put the water on his property and move it across the other person's property, which probably the Department of Transportation probably didn't really have the right to do, obviously, coming from what Joel's saying, but that was the way it was drawn up. So it wasn't like there was something incorrect drawn up. So in the meantime, Mr. Vidal, doing his due diligence, comes to the city, the professionals, the people that should have the answers about his concerns, and his concerns were, how do I do this? This makes common sense to me that I have to have the easements across another person's property. I have no control over that person's property. So he comes to the city and he talks to, this is all according to his documents. This is where I don't know what transpired actually. I'm taking Mr. Vidal's word for it, but as organized as he is and as concise on his dates and all this stuff, I gotta believe a lot of this is very right. So Mary Bosworth and Michelle Schweitzer are working with Mr. Vidal about the drainage issues, the drainage easements that he needs to obtain. So he's thinking he's getting something happening there. Then all of a sudden in September, the hospital closes on the land and buys the land. Then they get somewhere in between, when Mr. Vidal is working on these easements, they get a building permit that says another design that is proposed to our city. The city signs off on it and says, that'll work. Okay? Unbeknownst to each other. You got the right hand not knowing what the left hand's doing, and Mr. Vidal is talking to the left hand, which isn't talking to the right hand. And so Mr. Vidal ends up with an elevated property next to him with the inlets filled in where his water has nowhere to drain to besides the inlet that's on his property already. Will it drain slower? Absolutely. It wasn't designed that way. And the little bit I know about designs and engineering designs is that they design them a particular way because that's the way they're supposed to work. And if you change them, they don't work. So the questions that I have is, how come the right hand wasn't talking to the left hand on this, knowing that we had this building on this project? We know we had the street design being elevated. We knew there was going to be drainage. Drainage is a top-of-mind awareness in our city right now because of, it's very evident we have these problems everywhere. We don't want to create another one. I think we were slightly, if you judge just by this, we were slightly instrumental in a lack of communication here, which now is ending up having Mr. Vidal pitted against his neighbor at the Rapid City Regional Hospital, which really, they don't care because they came to the city, got their building permit, as far as they're concerned, whether they did or not, because it appears to have met what they said they were going to do. We don't know for sure because evidently we don't do that. We don't inspect it. I think Mr. Roberts asked that question. I'm still kind of fuzzy on whether we do or not inspect them. I think we do a visual inspection to kind of see if it works. But I don't think there's any instruments drawn out there to say that they met the slopes and those things. And that's whole nother topic that we should address. If we're going to spend millions of dollars of the taxpayers' money on drainage, we should make sure these things are working. So the reason I delayed it was so we can find out what happened with Mary Bosworth and Michelle Schweitzer, and why the left hand wasn't talking to the right hand, and why Mr. Vidal now is left holding the bag. Does that make sense to everybody? So there's really not a design flaw. I don't know how it can be a design flaw, but I guess I'm not going to argue with anybody about it. But the point is there's two different designs. There's the DOT's design, which never was carried out, and then there was TSP's design, which was approved by the city. So, Mr. Tech, you have a question, so I guess.
I actually have a comment to make about the DOT's design. The DOT was the one that installed the inlet on the regional hospital property at a different elevation than what their original design showed. It's in their right-of-way, it's in their jurisdiction to do that. I don't know why they chose to do that. The point I'm trying to get across is the DOT is a party to this as well. It's not just the city approved this, approved that. There are other parties involved in this that need to be at the table to have this discussion.
Right. But either way, Mr. Tech, if and let me clarify this, make sure I'm thinking right. If when they came in for the building permit, the whole DOT design wasn't even considered anyway. Is that correct?
As far as I know, correct.
So it's moot point.
Mr. Vidal also maintains that that inlet is different. It is, and the DOT itself made that change.
So I think the question boils down to this where the city hadn't been involved whatsoever. Who would, like, if this were you and the property was elsewhere, who would you hire to try to be the mediator for this issue?
Right.
Path of least resistance, go to the city, try to get some help there? Or, I mean, you know, if you have something that wasn't implemented or constructed properly, it's always going to boil down to those two entities. And so, you know, that's just something I want you to think
Yeah,
of.
and I agree with you, Madam Chair. And one of the things I would say, though, is that I still don't get where the city's role was, because he came in here, he came in and talked to who he thought would be the people that could give him the easement. So he was working that end of it. He was doing his job.
Right, and my understanding
I mean,
is that's
and-
what you're looking for the
yeah,
30
and I
days
mean,
to
how does that
clarify,
happen?
but I think, I don't know that the answer is
Right.
going to be any different than what staff has given us already. They've been pretty adamant, even through agenda review.
I guess I
and
never really
leading
point
up to
blank-
this process, that this was was not constructed properly. We didn't do the construction, we didn't do the design. So,
But if had Mr. Vidal's concerns gotten to the right people,
and
I don't
perhaps
think
they should
we'd
have
be
been
here. I
taken
think
up with the
Alderman Wright
DOT.
had alluded to that earlier, that if, who do you talk to? I mean, how do you keep that from happening? I guess that's the point. I mean, when he came here and tried to make the city aware of it, I guess I don't know what else he could have done. I mean, you know, because the city was the only one that could have kept this from happening by asking that Rapid City Regional understands that the DOT has this drawn out. I mean, I don't know how they.
My understanding is they did get everyone to the table, and if you would,
Well,
Mr.
yeah,
Roberts has been pretty patient.
Okay, yeah,
Okay,
thank
thank you. Mr. Roberts, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have one more question for City Engineer Dale Tech, if you don't mind, Madam Chair.
If Dale is got anything left in him over there.
You're probably getting tired of this, aren't you, Dale? I got in front of me a letter dated October 16th, 2014, and it's from you to Rapid City Regional for the urgent care, and it says, "To whom it may concern, it has been brought to the city's attention that the final site grading for Regional Urgent Care West 2116 Jackson Boulevard, Rapid City, South Dakota, is not in compliance with the approved building permit plans. The area in question located in the south corner of the property between the two inlets behind the sidewalk. Please take the appropriate action necessary to correct the grading to ensure adequate drainage." After that letter was sent, was it ever inspected to see, since they were out of compliance with their building permit plans, was it ever inspected to make sure they were in compliance with their plans?
Mr. Tech?
Later on that following June or July is when TSP came back with a revised plan, if you will. Mr. Vidal had included Exhibit 5 as the original grading permit that was submitted by the regional hospital, and you can see this area in question here and how much detail, or the lack of detail, if you will, is shown on that. As I alluded to, June and July, TSP came back with a more detailed look at this area, and my response to them is it appears to be in compliance or meets the intent of the original grading permit. I take no exception to it. I didn't say I approved it. I said I take no exception to it. They went out and made some improvements. No, it was not followed up for inspection. Once again, the assumption is when they're submitting a grading permit, they're going to build it the way that the professional showed that it was going to be graded. And follow the same standard with any follow-up plans that are submitted by a professional engineer.
So we can tell people to do whatever the city mandates them to do, but really there is no oversight on it. Is that what you're telling me?
Once again, we go out and look for general compliance. We don't break out our surveying instruments and send a crew of city staff out there to do a complete as-built topo survey of sites. We just don't do that. That's impractical.
And I know you couldn't. No, I do. I understand that you couldn't. But I guess the point I'm trying to make is we knew as far back as October that the grading site for the drainage was out of compliance. That's what the letter says right here. And we know that around Rapid City, we have terrible problems with drainage. And one of the things that I just kind of want to bring to light on this is it looks like there really wasn't good communication between the state and the city on this, what happened here, this one specific. Go ahead, Dale. You're ready to say something.
As I alluded to earlier in my testimony, we met a number of times, Mr. Vidal, the state, TSP, the regional hospital. This had been talked about for dozens of hours, so it's not like this was ignored and it wasn't addressed. I mean, there were a lot of issues that were being discussed, and I can't speak for the DOT and regional hospital as to the response to where this all ended up.
Thank you, Dale. I think that, you know, I hate to see Mr. Vidal have to go out and sue somebody over this whole deal, especially something this minor. But something this minor, I think, should kind of focus on, as a city, what remedy do we have when people do not take the appropriate actions that we, as a city, are telling them to do? If they're not doing it, as a city, what can we do? I mean, I don't think that it's really appropriate or fair to be telling anybody that gets into a situation like this that your only remedy is to go out and sue them. Because a lot of people don't have that financial backing to be able to sue somebody like Rapid City Regional Hospital. So anyway, thank you again, Madam Chair.
A reminder, motion on the floor is to continue this for 30 days for further information. Mr. Weifenbach, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I want to clarify that if we can come back in 30 days. I don't know that whether TSP's original design with the building permit would still solve Mr. Vidal's problem or not. I'm hoping that maybe Mr. Tech, if there's a way that we could reach out to these guys, and if it's a simple fix, that why can't we just work together and have, you know, fix it? If it doesn't seem like he's asking for that much. I mean, just to change a little drainage so that water will run off his property a little bit. Mr. Tech, go ahead.
I believe Mr. Vidal has also included letters that he sent to Regional Hospital requesting them do this type of work, and my understanding is they have chosen not to do that for one reason or another.
I understand. Mr. Tech, when someone does a project and there's an engineer in charge, are they responsible for the end result?
Typically, yes. I mean,
so if we go out there and measure these grades and they aren't done according to the plan, can we hold them accountable?
I don't know that we can unless it's a public safety issue and they were under contract for the city.
But we can hold the person who's for the application for the hospital or wherever it is. I mean, why? I think Alderman Roberts had alluded to this earlier. Why do we go through this dog and pony show if there's nothing we can do?
Right. I unfortunately, I'm not an enforcement person, so
Right, okay.
I don't know that I'm well equipped to answer.
But you're the guy that checks it. You tell us whether it's done right or not. And in this case, is it done right or not, according to the permit?
It appears that it's in general compliance with the grading permit that they originally submitted. Yes.
Well, in a layman's words, that's appropriate for what the city would expect.
Based on the level of information we received and is expected upon a commercial building permit application, yes,
Okay,
it's
so that's
it's
a dead deal,
appropriate.
now, since it's beating that horse. But the other horse I got to ride is what happened with Mary and Michelle? Why did Mr. Vidal not get the answers he needed to move forward? So I guess in 30 days.
I wasn't there, I can't speak to it. I
But
don't
you-
know if it was a 20-second conversation or an hour meeting. As I understand it, I think he just stopped by the counter and asked some general questions. Now, keep in mind, this is all before Regional Hospital submitted a building permit
Sure.
and knew of anything going on the
Sure.
site.
That's
And-
exactly why I made that a point to
And
say
city
that,
staff
because-
certainly would not know what the future development of the site was since we hadn't seen
Well, that'd be,
anything on it.
do they report to you, Mr. Tech?
Yes, they do.
Okay, that'd be, in 30 days, I'd give you plenty of opportunity to give us that answer to find out. So Mr. Vidal, in his mind, can answer that question. Mr. Vidal, I know that you've been patient, and I know you got to say something, and trying to get my arms around it, but I know you have a question that, go ahead, I guess, Madam Chair. I'd like to ask Mr. Vidal if this seems, this 30-day to find out what's the deal here.
If that's around the Thanksgiving vacation, I would prefer to do it before or after that. I'm taking my grandkids on a vacation that we've never done before.
But we'll extend it past that then, Mr. Vidal, because
That'd be fine. Just
I know
please,
one
please
thing.
don't ruin this vacation.
we won't do it when you're gone. How's that? Would that work for the council? We won't do it when you're gone. We understand how important this is to you. And
That'd be fine. Thank you.
Excuse me, December 1st is the next, are you still on vacation or
Let's see.
do you want to do it the meeting after that?
Might be the meeting after that.
15th?
I'm going to be gone the Tuesday before Thanksgiving through the Monday after Thanksgiving.
Okay.
Whatever those dates are. I'm sorry, I don't know what they
Offer a
are.
friendly amendment to for the motion for 3 Public Works meetings out as opposed to 2.
Besides that, I do have a whole bunch of questions and comments
And I would assume in the,
that based on based on what I've heard here.
so you kind of know where this is going and what. Okay. Maybe Mr.
Yeah,
Tech can-
yeah, but there was some things that were said here that are not accurate, and,
You can sure email us, Mr. Vidal, and that way we have it on hard copy.
okay.
Unless someone else had a question. Thank you.
I just to be clear, I think December 1st is the day after he returns, so probably December 15th is the best.
Thank you.
All right, seeing no further discussion, all those in favor of the motion on the floor to continue to the December 15th Public Works meeting, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Item number 27, moving on to the update on Omaha Street and Mount Rushmore Road parking lot and landscaping by Alderman Jerry Wright. I think the request is to, a motion to continue for 2 weeks, if someone would make that motion.
I'll make the motion to continue for 2 weeks.
A motion and a second to continue for 2 weeks. Any discussion on the motion? Seeing none, all in favor? Aye. All opposed? Motion to continue for 2 weeks carries. Item number 28, appeal of denial of request from Dream Design International Incorporated to remove a portion of the median in Eglin Street located adjacent to LeGrand Station near Elk Vale Road. And I will relinquish the floor to the committee members. Mr. Weifenbach, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm very familiar with the property here. I don't know if there's a motion on the floor or not.
No.
So basically, Mr. Shaffey, what you're trying to do is eliminate some of that, so it's easier to get in and out of there. Excuse me.
Yes, sir. We're requesting removal of a portion of the median to allow a full access to the property because that's the only access.
I gotta admit that's the craziest place I've ever seen to get into. I typically, when I pull in there, sometimes I just drive by because it's so hard to get in and out of. I don't know how you fix it. I've seen the state's letters. I'm not sure what you can do. I mean, is this what you're trying to do? Is make it so people can use it?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. I see that. I mean, I could see that if you don't, eventually that place will just have cobwebs in the windows or whatever. So, I mean, it's unfortunate that I've never seen a road design an entrance and an entry that made so little sense and was so difficult to access unless you're coming from the west heading east on that road. Is that Eglin that's in front of Menards there, or is that east-north?
Eglin.
Okay, yeah. So I'll listen to what my colleagues have to say, and I'm not sure how we approach this.
Mr. Roberts, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Can I ask Mr. Shaffey a question?
You know where this is at.
Mr. Shaffey, what is from the intersection on Elkville Road to the proposed curb cut, or the cut of the medium where it'll start, how many feet is that? It doesn't show too well on these plans.
What do you want to do?
This is a site plan of that intersection. The classification of the roads and what have you is right there. The site distance, or the distance from the intersection to the approach is 308 feet. The distance from the intersection to the approach on the east side of Elkville Road, which is another gas station, is 300, which is got a full access to Cheyenne Boulevard or extension of Elkville or Eglin, is 300 feet on the north side, 309 feet to the McDonald on the south side. So it is very comparable. And as far as the letter from the state, by the way, the required distance there by the city criteria is 250 feet, as you see on this document, which is the design criteria manual for the city. As far as the state, you know, number one, the road is not a state road, it's a city road. The state does not have any jurisdiction on it. The state participated in the construction of that road. But in addition to that, this is a site plan that has the state DOT shop, which is located on that road. Near the intersection of east-north, the DOT just added an approach at 390 feet approximately. It's actually closer than that, but was quick in measuring it. We don't have any survey there. And they just added an approach to the north side of that road. And incidentally, the traffic counts at this location along that road, because of the connection of east-north to Eglin just across from the main DOT entrance, is 1.5 times the traffic counts on the other side where we're requesting. For example, the traffic counts on this one is 6,000 cars a day. And if you look to the west, the traffic counts are 11,000 cars a day. Meanwhile, on the site that we're requesting, the traffic counts have maintained steady over the last 3 years, plus or minus 100 cars, around 4,200 cars a day, compared to 6,600 in front of the DOT where they constructed their own approach. If that is not hypocrisy, I don't know what is. You know, so it's not really right. Number one, this property, the person who has it has donated the right-of-way and has participated in the construction of the road. This is the plat for that lot, and if you look at it, there is an opening. The yellow highlight is basically the control of access, where the city, when the property was platted, required that no access be granted along the yellow border or yellow highlighted areas, except where that access is at. Currently, that property, if you drive by it, there is a trailer place that is on the west side of that lot. So that lot is being split into 2 lots, and which has been already approved. If you travel to get to the pumps, you know, even though the pumps are located right here, which is less than 150 feet from the intersection, it will take you approximately 1/4 mile to get to those pumps. Meanwhile, the guy across the street or kitty corner from this, he only has to drive about 350 feet because he's granted an access that we're not allowing this guy to be granted the same access as that guy. So it's like Are we being selective? Are we being inconsistent? That's for you to conclude. But in my opinion, we are doing disservice to this gentleman. As far as the design criteria for the city, it's clear that it states that 250 feet is the required distance, which he complies with. You know, the median was required during the construction of that road because the city dictated that, and the gentleman did not want to fight. But unfortunately, his experiment of trying this without that approach does not work. He is losing money on his business, while the guy across the street, he's got a thriving business. The traffic counts in this area will not increase by that much. The classification of this road is actually beyond what it should be, because the classification is not just lines drawn on the road. The classification of any road is by what the future growth is going to be and how the trends of the traffic and how much traffic is on that road. This road is classified as an arterial. Meanwhile, the road that is carrying 12,000 cars a day to the west of this is classified as a collector. And the road, this area here, has got a hillside to the south of it. The growth potential is very limited. Meanwhile, the area to the east, that road is graded already all the way to Radar Hill Road, and it's got about 10,000 acres of future growth with one axis only, which is Cheyenne Boulevard. So to come in and say, hey, we're going to limit this guy's access, and then we're going to grant the guys across the street access, even though we know that the traffic here is not going to grow that much. If you look at the traffic counts manual, which is, you know, a sheet that I put in earlier, which has this area showing the traffic counts going up by 3%, actually going up 3% 1 year, and then it went down by 6%. Meanwhile, the traffic counts in front of the DOT went up by 30% because they connected Eglin to east-north and connected east-north into Eglin by Dias. So therefore, the growth there is going to continue to grow. So it's like, we got to make sure that we're protecting the safety, but this is really going beyond protecting the safety.
Can I ask you another question? Hopefully you won't answer it quite so long, Mr. Shafi. Can you put up the picture of the road that you had again? I was curious, that median, how wide is that median there? If it's taken out, is there enough room without widening that road to put a turn lane in?
Yes, sir, there is enough width, and we had it laid out. And this is the existing road. That portion in the red is basically what is being proposed to be removed. And as far as the removal of that median, the intersection or the approach to the north, which is already existing, needs to be relocated to line up with the approach to the south. Otherwise, it will not be safe. So our recommendation to our client, if the median is to be removed, which is what the DOT is requesting, is that those two approaches be aligned. And we intend, and we made that recommendation to our client even before anybody requested that. So that's the portion that is to be removed. And then this is, you know, a preliminary layout. The amount of removal will depend on the stacking length on the eastbound turn lane. So we might remove even further to the west, probably another 20 or 30 feet to make sure that there is enough stacking length on the eastbound lane. But this is the layout which has adequate length and adequate width for the turning movement.
So what is, where that median ends right there and the turn lane starts, what's the distance from there to the intersection at Elkville Road?
I believe it is close to probably 280 feet, 290 feet.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Shafi. I appreciate that. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Yes, sir. We'll go to Alderman Weifenbach.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll make a motion to approve the,
The appeal.
appeal, but, yeah.
I have a motion to approve this appeal request by Weifenbach, a second by Wright. You still have the floor, Mr. Weifenbach.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm not sure what the ramifications of that'll be. I'm not a real fond believer of those medians. I know there's controversy on both sides of it. I drive that road. I've tried to use that gas station. It's almost impossible without that Ingress, egress. I know that's a right way out. That might have been the compromise they did when they built it, but it just doesn't work. I mean, you have to drive all the way up the road if you come off Elkville. You have to drive all the way up past the trailer, past the second lot with the trailers on it, go up around the building, up behind, and then come back down around and go into the gas pump. I mean, either that or we just ask the guy to close the gas station, I guess, and understand that. I mean, somewhat reminds me of Rushmore Crossings parking lot. It's just, it's almost impossible to get around in. So I'm sure that there'll be an unpopular decision and there may be some ramifications, but I don't think it'll be a safety issue in any regard. Thank you.
All right, since there's no one else in the queue, I'd like something clarified. I know that because Elkville, this corridor is an expressway, obviously the state is going to have to weigh in. I've heard it said both ways, that the median initially designed by your firm was a state requirement, yet you're saying that that it was a city requirement. So I'd like Mr. Tech to weigh in, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, we pulled the file for this development. The city did not require that median go in. That was part of the state's agreement, I think, with the adjoining property when the state paid to relocate half of this road, and as well as Mr. Shaffey's client. So it was not a city requirement to install this median. So.
Okay. Mr. Shaffey, if you would.
I would not be able to really dig in the file, but I know it was city's input that required the median. It was not the state. But I will dig in the file and make sure I could get you the exact conversation to make sure that I'm accurate in it. But I know.
I would certainly appreciate
You
seeing
bet.
that.
Yes.
Mr. Weissenbach, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have the same question for Mr.
But
Tech.
if
So
I may,
if it wasn't a city requirement, then does the city have heartburn with removing this thing?
Today, it makes sense to move. 30 years from now, it may not make sense for it to be have been removed. So that's a decision that the council has to make.
Thank you.
Mr. Estes, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Well, somebody wanted it this way, and I purposely went and bought gas there the other day, and it is I'm a creature of a path of least resistance when it comes to wanting to get gas, and it was a pain. But I guess I have a question for maybe our city attorney. You know, sometimes well, first of all, if I could, Madam Chair, I have a question for Haney.
Yes.
And Mr. Shaffey, is it my understanding that if this is approved, then your client is willing to pay for removing that median and realigning the approach?
yes, sir.
Okay, thank you. Now, my next question is for our city attorney, and you know, sometimes we allow people not to put sidewalks in, and we use without, you know, but when it's time to have the sidewalk back in, we use the warp or the without right of protest. Is that possible that if we allow them to take this out, that it's, you know, and maybe that would never come up, but if this area does develop the way somebody thought it was going to at some point in time, and maybe it's 25, 30 years, that this property pays for putting that median back in? Or is that just something we just not worry about right now?
Mr. Landine?
You know, it's going to be difficult to enforce because, you know, first of all, waiver of right to protest refers to an assessed project, which I don't know if we do an assessed project. And if you do, you probably have legal requirements that all the property owners split the cost equally and that they just wouldn't be able to. I don't know that through a warp you could put it all on them. You could try to condition it on that, but if it's 30 years from now, good luck tracking it. And by then, who knows who owns it, and it's going to be kind of a mess. I mean, that's one of the things you need to look at is, you know, do we think we're going to need this someday? And if we do, I think you should just assume you're going to pay for it. You could try to do something like that. We could put something together. We could have them sign it and say, well, look, we don't have to grant your request. So if you're willing to pay to put it back in someday, then fine, we'll do it. But at the same time, I'm sure the business owner, be it 10, 15, 20 years from now, isn't going to be any more excited to have that median in there. And so they're just going to go lobby the council at the time that this shouldn't be put in there. So I think you need to decide, like city engineer said, maybe it isn't needed now. Might be needed in the future. It might not. You need to make a decision on whether or not you want to do that at this time for this business.
Thank you, I yield.
Mr. Weifenbach.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I tendency to agree with our legal counsel, but I also agree that sometimes things just don't work right. And I think this is one of them cases where it just doesn't work correctly. And if it's 20, 30 years down the road, then at least we'll have a tax-paying entity still sitting there, or at least an opportunity for it to still be sitting there. So, thank you.
Motion on the floor is to approve the appeal. Seeing no further discussion, all in favor? Aye. All opposed? Motion carries.
Thank you.
Look for a motion to adjourn. A motion and a second to adjourn. All in favor? It was a weak eye, but we are adjourned.